Okay. Whoops. Henry George Daily Devotional 18 coming at ya. You may hear my small nieces making small niece sounds in the background. Such is the production quality of the Daily Devotional. Alright. I have not recorded in a few days, so a quick... Well, we're going to start over. Okay. Hello. Welcome. Henry George Daily Devotional number 18. You may hear the sounds of my little nieces playing in the background. That's what you may hear. Alright, we continue in chapter 3. Wages not drawn from capital but produced by the labor. I haven't read Progress and Poverty since last Friday, and today is Wednesday, so I might be a little bit lost as to where we left off, but I know we were going through different people contributing to creating a thing, and George is saying that every point in that process, the thing being created increases in value, and so the owner of it is constantly having their capital increased. I believe that's what this substantive paragraph was covering. Alright, we continue with George. In short, as the payment of wages is always conditioned upon the rendering of labor, the payment of wages in production, no matter how long the process, never involves any advance of capital or even temporarily lessens capital. It may take a year or even years to build a ship, but the creation of value of which the finished ship will be the sum goes on day by day and hour by hour from the time the keel is laid or even the ground is cleared. Nor by the payment of wages before the ship is completed does the master builder lessen either his capital or the capital of the community. For the value of the partially completed ship stands in place of the value paid out in wages. There is no advance of capital in this payment of wages, for the labor of the workman during the week or month creates and renders to the builder more capital than is paid back to them at the end of the week or month, as is shown by the fact that if the builder were at any stage of the construction asked to sell a partially completed ship, he would expect a profit. This is where, I mean, maybe selling a half-completed, like how come there aren't companies? I mean, I guess you could say business to business. There are these companies that sell half-completed ships all the time. So okay, if that is the model, like selling, you know, ship structures. I don't know. And so, when a Sutro or a St. Gothard tunnel or a Suez Canal is cut, there is no advance of capital. The tunnel or canal, as it is cut, becomes capital as much as the money spent in cutting it, or if you please, the powder, drills, etc., used in the work, and the food, clothes, etc., used by the workmen, as is shown by the fact that the value of the capital stock of the company is not lessened, as capital in these forms is gradually changed into capital in the form of tunnel or canal. There are balloons bouncing near me. Sorry. On the contrary, it probably and on the average increases as the work progresses, just as the capital invested in a speedier mode of production would on the average increase. Oh yeah, I had this thought during the paragraph before this, that you might notice that, capital degrades over time. So there is a sense in which the owner or employer's capital during the construction of a thing is lessening. But that is not a result of doing the production, right? Like if you have a bunch of wood and you leave it outside, it'll rot. And if you're actually using that wood to build a house, technically that wood is degrading as you're building it and possibly rotting as you're using it. Anyway, we have Justin asking, I thought you were at GDC. I was at GDC, and now I am back. And at GDC, I talked to people about Georgism a little bit. Okay, we'll continue with progress and poverty. And this is obvious in agriculture also, that the creation of value does not take place all at once when the crop is gathered, but step by step during the whole process which the gathering of the crop concludes, and that no payment of wages in the interim lessens the farmer's capital, is tangible enough when land is sold or rented during the process of production, as a plowed field will bring more than an unplowed field, or a field that has been sown more than one merely plowed. It is tangible enough when growing crops are sold, as is sometimes done, or where the farmer does not harvest himself but lets a contract to the owner of harvesting machinery. It is tangible in the case of orchards and vineyards, which, though not yet in bearing, being prices proportionate to their age. It is tangible in the case of horses, cattle, and sheep, which increase in value as they grow toward maturity. And if not always tangible between what may be called the usual exchange points in production, this increase of value as surely takes place with every exertion of labor. Hence, where labor is rendered before wages are paid, the advance of capital is really made by labor, and is from the employed to the employer, not from the employer to the employed. Yet it may be said, in such cases as we have been considering, capital is required. Certainly, I do not dispute that, but it is not required in order to make advances to labor. It is required for quite another purpose. What that purpose is, we may readily see. When wages are paid in kind, that is to say, in wealth of the same species as the labor produces, as for instance if I hire men to cut wood, agreeing to give them as wages a portion of the wood they cut, a method sometimes adopted by the owners or lessees of woodland, it is evident that no capital is required for the payment of wages, nor yet when, for the sake of mutual convenience arising from the fact that a large quantity of wood can be more readily and more advantageously exchanged than a number of small quantities, I agree to pay wages in money instead of wood. Shall I need any capital, provided I can make the exchange of the wood for money before the wages are due? It is only when I cannot make such an exchange, or such an advantageous exchange as I desire, until I accumulate a large quantity of wood that I shall need capital. Nor even then shall I need capital if I can make a partial or tentative exchange by borrowing on my wood. If I cannot or do not choose either to sell the wood or to borrow upon it, and yet wish to go ahead accumulating a large stock of wood, I shall need capital. But manifestly I need this capital not for the payment of wages, but for the accumulation of a stock of wood. Likewise, in cutting a tunnel, Likewise, in cutting a tunnel. Okay. If the workmen were paid in tunnel, which, if convenient, might easily be done by repaying them in stock of the company, no capital for the payment of wages would be required. It is only when the undertakers wish to accumulate capital in the shape of a tunnel that they will need capital. To recur to our first illustration, the broker to whom I sell my silver cannot carry on his business without capital. But he does not need this capital because he makes any advance of capital to me when he receives my silver and hands me gold. He needs it because the nature of the business requires the keeping of a certain amount of capital on hand, in order that when a customer comes, he may be prepared to make the exchange the customer desires. And so we shall find it in every branch of production. Capital has never to be set aside for the payment of wages when the produce of the labor for which the wages are paid is exchanged as soon as produced. It is only required when this produce is stored up, or what is to the individual the same thing, placed in the general current of exchanges without being at once drawn against, that is, sold on credit. But the capital thus required is not required for the payment of wages, nor for advances to labor, as it is always represented in the produce of the labor. It is never as an employer of labor that any producer needs capital. When he does need capital, it is because I think that's supposed to be he. It is because he is not only an employer of labor, but a merchant or speculator in or an accumulator of the products of labor. This is generally the case with employers. Okay? To recapitulate, the man who works for himself gets his wages in the things he produces as he produces them, and exchanges this value into another form whenever he sells the produce. The man who works for another for stipulated wages in money works under a contract of exchange. He also creates his wages as he renders his labor, but he does not get them except at stated times and stated amounts and in a different form. In performing the labor he is advancing in exchange. When he gets his wages, the exchange is completed. During the time he is earning the wages, he is advancing capital to his employer. But at no time, unless wages are paid before work is done, is the employer advancing capital to him. Whether the employer who receives this produce in exchange for the wages immediately re-exchanges it or keeps it for a while, no more alters the character of the transaction than does the final disposition of the product made by the ultimate receiver, who may, perhaps, be in another quarter of the globe and at the end of a series of exchanges numbering hundreds. That's all you had to say, George. All right, that concludes chapter 3. Wages not drawn from capital but produced by the labor. Are you still there, Justin? Okay, it was not a great video. HGDD 18, 16, 17, 18, Book 1, Chapter 3, Fin. What? What? File. Why did I get the disk? I must have misclicked. Mm-mm-mm. It is by the labor. Alright, upload video. Oh, yes. George walks through more instances of labor, creating wealth from which it is paid wages. He argues that typically the laborer actually advances capital to the employer. Occasionally, it's the inverse. However, the wages always come from the labor.
Throw with the handkerchief. How much the handkerchief?
You know, the handkerchief, a solid gold, the pinstripe gold.
Ooh.
I'd say all in, I'm about, $75,000 a suit.
$75 for the suit,
It's an August McGregor special.
Okay.
And the pinstripe is 18 karat gold.
18 karat gold.
You know, we had.
I don't want to watch these things. Alright. George can only make me so happy. Back to